The story only the desert still remembers. Before the rise of towers, before the glow of cities pierced the horizon, there was a single tale carried only by wind and sand, a story whispered by travelers, guarded by elders, and nearly erased by time itself. Yet for one Sheikh, this forgotten fragment of history would become the key to understanding who he was, and who he was meant to become. To understand why this ancient story matters today, we must return to a world untouched by ambition, a world where tribes survived not through wealth or influence, but through honor, resilience, and memory. The desert was not an empty expanse back then. It was a witness, a keeper of secrets, a guardian of moments too powerful to be written in books. He first heard the tale as a child, spoken in fragments around a campfire under a sky overflowing with stars. It was a simple story of a leader who disappeared into the desert to protect something greater than himself. No one knew what he carried. No one knew if he survived. All they knew was that after he vanished, the land changed, as if acknowledging his sacrifice. The story faded from his mind as he grew older, replaced by the demands of modern royalty. But it returned years later, unexpectedly, during a rare moment of quiet. He had been reviewing historical records when he found an old account, written in faded ink, describing the same mysterious figure. Only this version hinted at something more. The lost leader had not vanished in tragedy. He had made a choice that altered the course of his people's destiny. Intrigued, the Sheikh began searching for clues. Advisors dismissed the legend as myth. Scholars claimed the details were too vague to matter. But something in the story resonated with him, an invisible thread connecting past and present, urging him to look deeper. The first clue emerged when he uncovered a map, centuries old, marked with a single symbol in a remote stretch of desert. It matched the direction the lost leader was said to have traveled, and in that moment, the Sheikh felt a pull stronger than curiosity. It was as if the desert itself was calling him back to a truth only it still remembered. Yet he sensed that the journey ahead would not simply reveal history. It would reveal him. He began his search quietly, sharing his intentions with no one. The story felt too fragile, too sacred to hand over to committees and advisors who would dissect it until it lost its meaning. Instead, he assembled a small group of trusted companions and set out toward the forgotten region, where the map's lone symbol waited beneath the weight of centuries. The journey was harsh from the beginning. Heat pressed against them like a wall. Winds shifted without warning, carving new shapes into dunes, as if rearranging the desert's secrets in real time. Yet with every mile, he felt a strange familiarity, an inexplicable sense that he had walked this path before, not in body, but in spirit. By the third day, the silence around them grew unnervingly deep. No birds, no distant voices, no signs of life except for the constant whisper of sand moving against sand. It was in this silence that he began to understand why legend survived here. The desert remembered what people forgot. They camped near an ancient outcropping, its stones cracked by time, but still defined against the elements. While his companions rested, he studied the map again. The symbol marked not a destination, but a direction, an arrow pointing toward a horizon that revealed nothing. And yet he felt certainty blooming within him. The answers he sought were close. The next morning, they discovered something unexpected. Faint markings carved into rock, nearly erased by erosion. At first they seemed random, but as he traced them with his fingertips, the pattern became clear. They were not symbols. They were footsteps, etched into stone centuries earlier, preserved by chance or fate, and they led deeper into the desert. Following them required abandoning the path marked on their maps. His companions hesitated. The new direction offered no guarantee of water, shelter, or safety, but he pressed forward, unable to ignore the pull of the ancient trail. With every step, he felt the invisible connection tightening between himself and the lost leader whose story had drawn him here. As the sun began to sink, the desert abruptly changed. The dunes dropped into a valley unlike anything they had seen, a hollow carved by wind and time, wide enough to hold the shadows of history. At its center stood a lone, weathered structure half buried in sand. It was not a temple, not a fort, something simpler, older, built with deliberate humility. Inside, they found signs of life long vanished. A stone basin, fragment of pottery, faded patterns painted on the walls. But one discovery struck him deeper than the rest. A single line of ancient script, carved with careful precision. To protect a people, one must first walk where no one follows. The words echoed through him. They were not a warning. They were a mirror, and he sensed that the truth the desert held was far more personal than he had dared to imagine. He stood before the ancient inscription, feeling the weight of centuries settle across his shoulders. The structure around him, humble, unadorned, forgotten, felt less like a ruin and more like a message. Someone long ago had carved these words for a future they could not see, trusting the desert to deliver them to the one who needed them most. And now, that message had reached him. As he explored the chamber further, he noticed something unusual. The walls were arranged to create a faint echo, one that magnified even the softest whisper. It was as if the place had been designed for reflection, not habitation. A sanctuary where a leader could confront truths too heavy for any counsel. His companions waited outside, sensing instinctively that this was a path he had to walk alone. In the quiet, he felt a shift inside himself, an almost imperceptible unraveling of questions he had carried for years. He thought of his own journey, of the choices he had made under the crushing weight of responsibility, of the sacrifices no one spoke of but everyone expected. And suddenly, the legend of the leader who vanished into the desert no longer felt like myth. It felt like recognition. But the desert had more to reveal. At the back of the chamber, beneath layers of sand, he found a concealed doorway. It opened into a narrow passage, barely wide enough for one person to walk through. The air inside was cooler, the darkness deeper. The walls bore markings, symbols of guidance, protection, and hardship, each more intricate than the last. These were not decorations. They were records of journey. As he moved forward, the markings told a story of a leader burdened by division among his people. A leader who chose exile not out of fear, but out of necessity, believing that stepping away would allow his nation to heal. Each symbol revealed a new layer of sacrifice, of decisions made in silence, of a heart torn between duty and truth. And with every step, he felt the line between past and present begin to blur. Soon the passage opened into a cavern illuminated by a narrow shaft of sunlight. At its center lay a stone pedestal holding a single object, a metal seal inscribed with an emblem he recognized from royal archives, a crest believed lost for centuries. The seal was more than a relic. It was proof that the lost leader was not a myth, not a rumor, not a forgotten tale. He had existed. He had walked this exact path. And he had left behind the symbol of his authority, willingly choosing anonymity over power. The realization struck with profound force. The Sheikh understood now that the legend was not merely a story of disappearance. It was a testimony of conviction, of a leader who walked away not to abandon his people, but to save them from a future they were not prepared to face. And in that understanding, the Sheikh confronted a revelation he had spent years avoiding. He, too, had been living in tension between the life he was expected to uphold and the truth he carried within himself. The desert had not called him to define history. It had called him to understand his own. Yet the greatest revelation awaited him still. As he lifted the ancient seal from its resting place, something shifted beneath the pedestal, a hidden compartment revealing one final message, carved in lines sharp enough to have survived untouched through ages. The leader who loses himself for his people must ensure he does not lose them in return. He read the words again and again, each repetition sinking deeper. This was the heart of the legend. This was the lesson the desert had guarded. And now, he would have to face what it demanded of him. He stood in the cavern's dim light, the ancient seal heavy in his hands, the final inscription echoing through him like a truth he had always known but never dared to articulate. The leader who loses himself for his people must ensure he does not lose them in return. It was a warning and a reminder, and perhaps a prophecy. The lost leader had walked into the desert to protect his nation, but in doing so, he vanished from their future. His sacrifice had saved them and separated him from them forever. The Sheikh felt the weight of that paradox settle into his chest. He had spent years giving pieces of himself to duty, shaping his life around expectations, quieting his own desires to maintain the balance his role demanded. And somewhere along the way, he too had begun to fade, silently, invisibly, losing parts of himself in service to a destiny he was never permitted to question. The lost leader was not a stranger. He was a reflection, taking a slow breath. He stepped back into the narrow passage, feeling the cavern close behind him like a chapter finally understood. His companions met him at the entrance of the ruin, seeing the shift in his expression but asking nothing. Some truths reveal themselves only in silence. Without a word, he led them out of the valley, carrying both the seal and the story the desert had trusted him to recover. As they traveled back toward civilization, the dune seemed different, no longer vast emptiness, but a living archive of the choices that had shaped his ancestors. And with every mile, the message carved in that hidden chamber pulsed within him. Duty could not demand that he disappear. Leadership could not require his erasure. The empire he served deserved a leader who remained whole, not one who vanished into myth. When he finally returned to the palace, the noise of daily life felt distant. Advisors approached him with their usual urgency, eager to resume plans and discussions. Elders requested audiences, offering guidance rooted in tradition. But he moved with a steadiness none of them had seen before, a calm that did not defy their expectations, but existed outside them entirely. Something within him had aligned. He convened the council soon after, not to recount the legend, but to address what it meant. He spoke of leadership shaped not by sacrifice alone, but by self-awareness. He spoke of the danger of losing identity inside the machinery of duty, and he spoke of the future he envisioned, one where rulers did not disappear behind their responsibilities, but stood present within them. Some found his words unsettling, others found them necessary, but all recognized that he was no longer the man burdened by the weight of silence. He was a leader emerging from a journey few could comprehend, carrying wisdom rooted not in books or politics, but in a truth forged in the desert's unforgiving light. As the meeting concluded, he returned to his private chamber and placed the ancient seal on his desk. It did not represent power. It represented clarity. The kind of clarity that turns a life from obligation into purpose. He stepped out onto the balcony, watching the sun sink behind the horizon in a blaze of gold. For the first time, he felt fully present in the role he had inherited. Not trapped by it, not consumed by it, but connected to it with both conviction and humanity. His future would still demand sacrifice. His responsibilities would remain immense, but he would not lose himself, and he would not allow the empire to lose him either. The desert had given him a story. He would spend the rest of his life turning it into a legacy. Subscribe to join the journey.